Welcome to this episode of the Lion-Faced Guru podcast. My name is Amrita Simha, and today I have with me the founder of Amrita Mandala, my guru and my friend Amrita Baba. And today we will discuss a topic or a question that is very central to meditative spiritual practice, to Dharma, and perhaps one that every single seeker at one point or several points will ask themselves. And that question is, what is enlightenment? So would you like to start, Baba, to introduce this mysterious question?
Oh, I think we really did it this time, didn't we? With this topic. Well, what is enlightenment? The question has been very central, the heart and soul of my whole career of practice. Soon 22 years of like regular daily practice, full-time practice, and then yeah, it's I remember very early on, like everybody, I assume, like who is in touch with, let's say, traditional spirituality, traditional yoga, traditional dharma. I use those words interchangeably: dharma, yoga, spirituality, the art of enlightenment, the art of awakening. So I think anybody who read some books or join some courses in any traditional setting hears about enlightenment. That is sometimes also called awakening, bodhi, bodhi, like it's called in Buddhism, is often translated as awakening, but awakening can also mean like the Buddha, like fully enlightened Buddha was awakened. But just to be clear, when Simha and myself, when we discuss awakening and enlightenment, awakening, like has been discussed in the previous episodes of this podcast, is actually just, well, the first awakening experience, first shift, and there are many afterwards. But when we discuss enlightenment, it means full enlightenment. It means Buddhahood. It means technically in traditional setting, both Buddhist and Hindu, those who are fully enlightened ones are called Mahasiddhas. Maha means great and Siddha means perfected or greatly accomplished or fully accomplished. So Mahasiddhas. So yeah, so that's how we use the term. But anyway, what I was meaning to say about that I was exposed to that concept pretty early on. But of course, it took many years to get, usually when enlightenment is discussed, it's a very vague discussion, right? Even if we read very traditional, highly accomplished saints or sages or masters from Hindu tradition, it's very vague. It kind of gives a very vague understanding what full enlightenment or enlightenment is, and it's not that different in Buddha Dharma, in Buddhism, although there are much more standards, or like the standards are there, you kind of just have to pay attention to the, how do you say in English, like the main points, to find the red thread, you know, in the middle of all kinds of technical definitions and explanations and commentaries and so on. So I was exposed to that idea very early on, and it just went click in my head. this is what I have been looking for. This is what I want. This is what I want to dedicate my life to, and I have. But it took so many years to really understand what it exactly means. So there is this basic understanding that suffering, delusion, confusion, that is called by the term samsara in Buddhism. Samsara means going around in wheel of delusion, wheel of confusion, wheel of suffering and pain. There is very good understanding actually in Buddhism that the samsara happens in our mind and emotions. It happens in our mental, emotional mind. It's not so much in the physical body, although the physical body gets affected by it. But it's this suffering, this delusion is about the mind, and so is enlightenment. So that we can, through specific experiences, we can come to understand that in the very midst of those thoughts and emotions and mental, emotional, psychological events and functions and happening, can this enlightenment be found? So there was something I was coming to, but I completely lost the track of my thought.
Well, maybe you remember it. Yeah, so like it's commonly said that nirvana, or this enlightened nature, and samsara have a common ground, have the same ground, which is mind itself. One thing you said about like instantly, like the whole process of like coming to terms with this whole concept of enlightenment, I had a very similar. So for me, it was the term spiritual awakening that just kind of clicked. And it was actually in the context, it was meant initial awakening. But I had no understanding of the separation or distinction between initial awakening and full enlightenment at the time, but it didn't matter because it was that same kind of like I just zoomed in on the words on the page and I knew that, I had no idea what it was, but I knew that this is something that I have to figure out. So it's kind of like a non-conceptual just attraction to the whole thing, and that kind of got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Start puzzling the pieces together in a very stumbling manner.
Yeah. That's what I was meaning to say, is that the problemacy of the vagueness of definition. So, it is understood that both delusion and suffering, as well as enlightenment, are about the mind, but how exactly? And this is something that we've discussed a lot. This is was it 18th episode of this podcast? So we've discussed all these previous 17 episodes, probably several more. But also in Amrita Mandala, we both practice Amrita Mandala method. We've spent so much time, so many years, figuring out exactly how it works and what full enlightenment is, isn't it? And by the way, something that you said about that spiritual awakening, I think that, and this is relevant to this episode as well, I sometimes think to myself these days, it's relevant in one sense, but how interesting spiritual teachings awakening teachings, enlightenment teachings are in the world today. I think that many people, there are very famous figures like Eckhart Tolle, and people read his books, and millions of people watch his lectures and read books and see lectures of other very famous spiritual teachers like the Dalai Lama, and Ammachi is there giving hugs, darshans. But still, I wonder kind of how those teachings meet the demand of people, and if there is enough, if the teaching is expressed in a way that it makes people kind of not only enthusiastic, because there's always enthusiasm, but that's exactly kind of the problem, that the teaching needs to be really lucid and clear and taught well so that it can be applied successfully. And the practices need to be really relevant to awakening and enlightenment, so that the practices aren't doing something else, like I feel is the case with concentration practices, mindfulness practices. It's kind of related, but it's only related. It's not direct. It doesn't go into the heart of the matter, right? So I kind of feel that there are all kinds of how do you say, like things, impressions, tones related to this topic. And but this is something that I think about, or have found myself thinking about the past couple of years, that how relevant is the art of enlightenment in the world today, and how that demand is met, because there are millions and millions of people who have read authors like Eckhart Tolle and others. But this is something that I think about, and this is something we were meaning to and we will maybe discuss a bit later in this podcast. Is there something you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think that this is my observation, and also my experience at certain points throughout the path, is that when these practices don't hit exactly, so they don't become then a part of you. It doesn't actually transform you on a deep level. And
Exactly.
if it doesn't become a part of you, and another word, like another way to say that, is that it's not authentic practice. Authentic meaning, well, I'm not going to go into the Greek, but it means like owning, like
Yeah,
self-evolved, or yeah. And what happens then is that there becomes this separation. So you have this compartmentalized understanding of,
exactly.
uh, like there's a separation between everyday being and the art of enlightenment, when in fact the art of enlightenment is the art of everyday being. So if it doesn't, if that distinction happens, then it is not relevant for everyday life. It's
Oh,
not seen. It's not seen like why this is kind of like a hobby. You can go on the mat and you can have these very nice experiences doing jhana practice or shamatha practice, temporal experiences, and it's nice. It's feels very good. It might be healing on some level,
mhm.
but there is still this separation. It doesn't seep into your everyday actions, your everyday life. Doesn't touch the people around you the same way that authentic art of being practice
Yeah,
does.
yeah, yeah. Uh, and this is a discussion we've had on this podcast. We've analyzed these problems so many times, as well as on our retreats and in private discussions. It is, you and I both, we have pretty solid experience of irrelevant practices that always kind of remain separate from the main course, from the main thing, main matter. But it is, I wouldn't say heartbreaking to me anymore, but it is very unfortunate that, I also have know so many people who have spent so many years, sometimes 3, 4, 5 decades, doing practices that, you know, figuratively speaking, they just keep reading the menu and it just never gets to the meal. It just never gets there, and that's very unfortunate. Well, some people, even with irrelevant practices, there are different emphasis, different applications, different practices. So some people reap relatively little bit more benefit than others. But sometimes it seems very sad, really, that people who have practiced for sometimes for decades and might be ordained practitioners and so on, they have never had a single awakening experience and haven't really healed much of their astral body meridian system either. So, it's kind of like a belief system, just concepts, and they are relying on those. This is very unfortunate. But let's go to defining full enlightenment in simple terms, in commonsensical terms. Would you like to take a stab at it?
Yeah, so my experience is that when my experience of first of all of what enlightenment is comes from these momentary, what we call cessations, where all of the self-delusion, and we'll get back to like what exactly self-delusion and like trauma patterns, like these thought patterns, and but everything that is not everything that is fabricated falls away during these cessations, and you get to then experience full enlightenment, albeit before the final enlightenment, in a temporal, like temporarily. So, and in that explanation, like I mentioned, it falls away. There's a hint there that what enlightenment is an absence of all ignorance, everything that skews the situation, or everything that skews your experience away from what really is, to put it like that. I realize I'm speaking a bit vaguely, like we were talking about. But this, yeah.
Yes. uh, I think it's really simple. In in I'll try to say this in a way that I could hopefully be able to convey the meaning to somebody who I have a 2-minute discussion in front of a supermarket, maybe my neighbor. So, well, self-delusion, we think in terms of me and other. And we think this thought, me, myself, mine, I, countless times throughout the day. And we feel, we associate, our whole functioning of the mind is centered around that notion of self, separate self, that separates me from others, me from situations, me from life, me from everything. So it creates a bubble, this me. And it feels, when you start looking at it tasting into it, feeling into it, you realize that it doesn't actually feel natural or good. This sense of me, sense of I, it feels completely artificial. And if you take a moment and sit down to really taste it, what this I thought feels like, and that's all you think about for a moment, it will become apparent in 2 minutes when you think I. When you refer to that same I thought that you do throughout the day, but in a little bit milder way. But when you do it, you really focus on it. You become aware of it. It tastes like shit and it feels awful. It feels the opposite of good, the opposite of natural. So this is kind of a very, very basic explanation what the sense of I and being deluded by this sense of self is. But there's a little bit more. So it's not only the gross I thought that we have, but it's in emotions. We have positive emotions, negative emotions, neutral emotions. We have thought associations, we have memories, we have dreams, we have fantasies. And that same I is in most of that stuff, but not in very apparent form. But it is in all of it, or most of it. So that same unnatural energy that feels off, this concept of self, is marks the whole functioning of the mind, emotions, and psyche. And this can be shocking when you first start becoming aware of it, that during sleep, the first thing in the morning, throughout the day, you don't get breaks from that. So it is there, the sense of self, sense of I, is there pestering all the time, causing that sense of insufficiency, that feeling that something is fundamentally off, that it's there. And it can be shocking to realize that. But it doesn't need to stay like that. So there is a way out of it, or way through it. Like I said a few minutes ago, that thoughts, emotions, all functioning of the mind, enlightenment or awakening happens in the midst of that. It doesn't happen, it happens regarding those thoughts and emotions and dreams and fantasies. It happens in those very mind content. You see that, oh, it's possible to have these thoughts, emotions, dreams, and fantasies, these common everyday experiences, but just without that sense of self that feels off. So, awakening or enlightenment happens in the midst of the mind and psyche. And when we talk about, okay, so again, if listeners or viewers, if you don't really understand a lot of things that I'm saying, I'm referring to our previous episodes that explain awakening and consecutive awakenings and so on. So this episode is about enlightenment or full enlightenment, where we look at these things from the how do you say, like a mountaintop view, when you are closing or where you have already finished all of this processing. But just to give that commonsensical definition, so there is this self-delusion that I just talked about, and it can be fully seen through. In Buddhist tradition, there is vipassana or emptiness meditation that you that helps you to see through this. In Hindu tradition, there is Jnana Yoga, Jnana. It is pronounced, it's not jhana, it's jnana. So there's Jnana Yoga for this purpose. I mean, those principles are in Hinduism, Buddhism. Those principles are there. So absence, full enlightenment means absence of this notion of self. Whether it's a small self or a great self, absence of it. Not small, not big, not medium size. So, you know, you don't solve the problem by detaching from a notion of small self and then identifying with, oh, great, I am great consciousness. That doesn't solve the problem. You have to see through that notion of self, whether it's apparent, like a gross form of self, subtle or very subtle self. You have to see through all of them and release all of those notions, those delusions, to align clarity. So the selflessness that follows, it's just aliveness, it's clarity. And it's very personal. It is not, it's personal in a different way. Not in a selfing way, but it has everything to do with you and everything to do with your life, your thoughts, emotions, your everyday living. Okay, so that's one side of full enlightenment. I realized that when I'm talking to my neighbor in front of supermarket, it's already well past 2 minutes, but I'm trying to keep it as simple and commonsensical as possible. And then there is the absence, second kind of part of enlightenment, the absence of all negative states. Negative is a little bit problematic word. I might as well say absence of all limited states. But for the sake of simplicity, I'll say absence of all negative states. So wisdom practice or emptiness doesn't cover all corners. Even when somebody has finished the whole path of wisdom, emptiness, insight, jnana yoga, they can still be foundational negativity because of trauma in the system, psychological trauma. So those also need to be healed. Those need to be transformed and returned into the original state without trauma or before trauma, before negativity. So there you have it. Kind of two different tracks that need to be covered. The whole self-based, selflessness track, and then this emotional negativity, trauma-based existence also. And when you have those two, we have full enlightenment. But it is also interesting to not interesting in a, well, intellectually, conceptually, sure, to get us started, but the experience of that, even a momentary experience. You mentioned cessation, which is very, very important in spiritual practice, yoga, Dharma practice, to have cessations, ceasing of selfing mechanism, ceasing of that trauma-based negative emotional states. So it is actually very easy when the practices are relevant to the main matter, which is enlightenment, when the practices really address and enable us to recognize our pure nature, our basic nature, which is revealed when you remove these self-based habits and trauma habits and negativity. What is revealed through relevant functional practices is our natural state, our enlightened nature, which, both behind me and behind Simha, you can see, what do you have? You have Guru Rinpoche there, and you have Babaji, and you have Jesus' picture. I have also Guru Rinpoche, and that's Maranatha, that's Jesus Guru behind me there. So then we can discover from each one of us, from any one of us, not only Simha and me and Jesus and Guru Rinpoche, but in anybody, we can discover this basic nature, this enlightened nature that is pure. And it radiates, figuratively speaking, light, pure light. It radiates. The thing that happens with self-delusion and trauma is that it completely distorts. All human beings have in our subtle bodies, we have energy flowing through. So this is something that is discussed in all forms of yoga, that there are subtle bodies, energetic bodies, and that there is vital energy, prana, chi. There is subtle energy coursing through those subtle bodies. Different traditions have different ways of explaining the subtle bodies, and it's kind of complex, but the principles of it are really simple. But what happens in every human being's everyday life is that there is this vital energy or prana coursing through our system. It happens spontaneously. But then there are these traumas and selfishness, I-ness in that system, and it completely distorts our experience and makes it fragmented. But when we don't have any of those distortions and fragmentation there, it is just energy flows freely, completely unimpeded, completely unobstructed. And that is the so-called enlightened state. And in a sense, it is not special at all. It is simply our original state, original nature, original condition. What makes it special in the minds of many is that there are so few people who are in that experience. The so-called saints and sages and masters. Unfortunately, it is very rare. But I think that this is going to change, that awakening has already kind of become mainstream. It's discussed in Oprah. It's discussed in Dr. Phil, But I think that enlightenment, Buddhahood, Mahasiddhahood, is next, that will become like a common or relatively common phenomena, much more common than it ever was in history. And again, I'm not talking about something mystical or high-flying or something that is apart from everyday life. or everyday circumstances. No, I'm talking about, I'm a Westerner, as you can see, as is Simha, as are probably most of you who are listening, viewing. It's about our lives. So, yeah, my point is that it is possible to, with the help of practices that actually work, that go to the main course, the heart of the matter from the beginning, it is possible to have those cessations when the whole selfing mechanism and traumatic negative states cease momentarily. And then when you keep repeating that ceasing, you simply keep repeating that ceasing. This is not mindfulness practice. This is not concentration practice. This is not going into some meditative states or exalted states of consciousness. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that selfing mechanism collapsing, trauma collapsing, to leave nothing else than pure basic reality. And repeating that is the key to becoming fully enlightened. And this is actually has been, so I hope that was commonsensical enough. But this has been extensively discussed by different yogis, yoginis, masters for centuries and for thousands of years. But I think that the times are changing, and good that they are, but I think that kind of the past and the future of Dharma, the art of enlightenment, there will be change there.
So yeah, it's an uncovering process and not trying to create something that is called enlightenment. Enlightenment is already there. You just need to uncover it. I think there was one important point about, you said that you think that it will change now, that awakening that enlightenment has been so confined to certain secret traditions, so to speak.
Yeah.
And one point there is that you mentioned also, we have all these different Mahasiddha figures from different traditions, and I think that's pretty new to our time, that we actually can compare different traditions that were very hidden or secret before. Now there is information, there is the possibility to practice with these various Mahasiddha figures in practices such as Guru Yoga, to actually feel both the similarities between their personalities, their enlightened nature, their enlightenment, and also the differences from tradition to tradition. So just kind of clarifying that this is a universal phenomena. It's not confined. There are not, because many people do believe that there are different purposes or different end stages, different goals of different wisdom traditions.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that it's in fact the very same, though it might be poetically or verbally, conceptually transmitted using different models, which we're confined to using models when communicating through words verbally. And on the surface, these might look like they're conflicting or contradicting each other, but in essence, it's a very kind of normal, down-to-earth human thing that every human being can realize for themselves.
That's the thing, sectarianism. I think that it comes as a surprise to, it came as a surprise to me in the formative years of my training, but I think it comes as a negative surprise to many that when people realize that in Asia there is such a thing called sectarianism. You know, I don't really want to point fingers, but there are not that many areas in the whole vast area of Asia where different schools of Buddhism, not to even mention different religions, peacefully coexisted and cooperated with each other. So there are not really such areas in anywhere in Asia, and it might come as a surprise. How can that it be? Because this is about enlightenment and pure nature and love and compassion. So what's up with this? Well, samsara is up with this. Delusion is. Isn't it exactly the same thing that happens between in the villages between neighbors, between political parties, between any groups? so so yeah, but this is also, just to continue a little bit, this is also a bit problematic when we discuss the universal standards. There are universal standards to enlightenment, but the problem is that, just like you, Simha, said, that this hasn't really been done before properly, as at least I'm not aware. But you know, there is Ishanath, Jesus behind you, there is Padmasambhava, there's Babaji's picture there on the top of the cupboard.
Lao Tzu from
Lao Tzu, oh my God, already four different masters from four very different, distinct traditions. No, there are universal standards. But if you start comparing one book that has been written by somebody who's not even awakened or relatively awakened with somebody else's commentary or book from different tradition who has more or less the same experiences, the messages from these two books and three books and four and five books, they butt heads, they collide, because they don't understand that there are universal standards. What am I talking about? What universal standards? This is the big question, isn't it? So, well, Simha is Norwegian, I'm Finnish, but you might be Indian, you might be American, you might be from Peru, you might be from China, you might be anywhere. You might be a man or a woman, but what is same is how our subtle bodies are built. We have the same subtle bodies, no matter who you are, male or female, whether you are from south or north, from west or east, we have same subtle bodies. That's the key. That's always been the key. I remember we started this recording by speaking a little bit about that, during those initial stages of our paths, that I think applies to a lot of people, that you hear these rumors, these vague definitions and things about enlightenment and awakening, and somebody met this Swami in Germany who, oh, that Swami had really special energy. I think he was really highly attained. Something like this, rumors, right? Okay, we read books, we meet different spiritual practitioners from different traditions. There are different traditions, there are different religions, there are different sects, there are massive amounts of literature of low quality, good quality, really high quality, scriptures that explain our nature, explain how it all works. But there's a deeper level, like the next level, which are universal standards. Understanding that when a Christian mystic in history or now living, perhaps doing some Christian contemplative heart prayer or something in Greece or wherever, when that person has a first shift, kind of first growing into the presence of God or Christ, or when somebody who's practicing Zen meditation in Arizona, United States, or when somebody practices, it actually doesn't happen that often through bhakti yoga, but it happens every now and then. Somebody practices bhakti yoga, learned in a yoga festival in France, or practices jnana yoga in India, and has that, whether they call it awakening or something else, that first shift happens in exactly the same way in the subtle body. I'll say that again. It happens exactly the same way in the subtle body, regardless what tradition you follow. And again, there are also traditions where this doesn't happen at all, because the practices are irrelevant to the heart matter. So we've discussed awakening and consecutive awakenings a lot in this podcast in previous episodes. And more recently in our Sangha in Amrita Mandala and on our retreats the past few years, as well as in this podcast, in a couple of previous episodes, we've discussed healing and revealing of the so-called body of light, light body, rainbow body. And again, okay, you said rainbow body, light body. Rainbow body is Tibetan terminology. Light body is Hindu. It's in Yogananda's book. I might as well say golden body. I might say immortality. Wait. Immortality? That's Taoist. That's Taoist. Don't put all these things on the same table, for Christ's sake. Don't do that. No, there are universal standards to everything. So somebody who has very sectarian or dogmatic view of Jesus Christ, for example, might say that, oh, no, Jesus Christ was the only prophet, was the only savior, was the only Son of God. Or somebody who follows Guru Padmasambhava's, Guru Rinpoche's teachings in Tibetan Buddhism might say that, no, Guru Rinpoche was the greatest. He was number one, and all the other Lao Tzus and Jesuses and Babajis might be somewhere on stages, but they are lower to Padmasambhava. No. Okay. It seems like that from the point of view of fundamentalism and dogmatism and sectarianism, but there are universal standards. There are. And these universal standards, you can't, it is very difficult. You can do it to some degree, but if you take, let's say, the 10 fetters model from Theravada, and then you take perhaps some Hindu explanation of the same thing, and you kind of try to make them match, and they don't really it's like trying to make a puzzle with pieces from two different puzzles. That's where the views and opinions based on relative experience collide. But there is a level deeper, and from that level deeper, there is no colliding, no headbutting, no debating, no arguments. There are universal standards that anybody can discover from first-hand study, yogic meditative study, not by believing some quotes or believing some doctrines, because that's what people do very widely everywhere, but through first-hand discovery. And there the universal standards can be found and nowhere else.
Yeah, I think this is like probably one of the most important things to understand about any art, not just the art of enlightenment, is that
Oh,
these principles, they're found in every human endeavor. Like there's this deeper level that unifies seemingly different perspectives, and that the only way to get there is to actually practice the art correctly.
oh,
And that, because you can have two people looking at the same thing. One will, like looking at, for example, comparing two different seemingly opposite expressions or conflicting expressions, one will immediately see exactly how they fit, but they cannot necessarily then, like they can't just argue through argumentation convince the other person necessarily. Like they have to kind of, it has to be like a spark that goes off so that you understand the principles behind them, or those universal standards that you mention, or how you put it. And I see it like in all different kinds of areas that people are stuck on the level of forms, and they don't see beyond those kind of the surface level,
yeah,
and it just leads to all kinds of different problems, bickering and just misunderstanding. And if you're at that level of understanding, surface level understanding, and then because that happens in today's, like in academia, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
you become an expert, you get the expert label. It happens in academia, it happens in meditative practices as well, that somebody will be labeled an expert and they will speak from their shallow understanding, and they will gain, like people, they persuade people through their maybe they're really good speakers, but it's getting nowhere because it's not really based on that level, which is truth, because
reality.
that's what it is. Principles are truth, but they even people who like have, because there are also different levels of understanding of principles. It takes time to uh, um, come to a level where you can express as well your understanding,
Yeah,
because that's like it's very common to say that you don't understand anything properly until you can express it, or until you can teach it. But you can have tastes of these principles from the get-go. Yeah. So my point is that this is really central to any art, is that principles over rules, mere rules.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is in my life. I have a long history of martial arts and also handcrafts. I was never really attracted to something merely philosophical or conceptual because it seemed that it's a very shallow world, that you can't have certainty that way. But when it's something that is you can touch and feel and experience, then it is something real, something true, and I was going to say non-debatable. It's non-debatable, but also becomes unnecessary to debate, which is more important than non-debatable, isn't it? I came to think when you started saying what you said, I started thinking martial arts, and I'll say this just briefly before going to the technical definition of enlightenment. But in martial arts, within the last 30 years, there has been a revolution, kind of revolution, happening with mixed martial arts. So before that, up until early 90s, and still actually in pockets all around the world, there is kind of like a people practice different martial arts and might have very strange views about how effective it is in real fighting, real martial situation. People might be shadow doing, in boxing it's called shadow boxing. People might be practicing some martial art where there is no physical contact with the opponent at all, and then they might have the belief that this will be actually, when somebody attacks me or attacks my friend, this will be very effective. Just all of a sudden, without ever changing actual punches or kicks with anybody, this will be very effective in that situation. And I have a black belt in this art. I'm a professor in this art. So what happened 30 years ago when mixed martial arts was invented, where it's all about hard contact. You can kick, you can punch, you can choke, you can make locks in the joints. Everything is allowed except poking the eyes or hitting in the groin. So it leaves no space for nonsense, no space for fancy theories at all. But what happened and has happened, keeps happening to our days, is that people who come from this delusional fantasy world of so-called martial arts, their fantasies and delusions disappear fast when they meet somebody who knows how to punch. And this is absolutely beautiful. I've often admired that and have been kind of sorry that, oh, I wish it was possible in Dharma and yoga as well, because it's delusion and fantasies are rampant. And it is often the case that people merely believe because it's been written in some book that is 700 years old, that this tradition or this path is authentic path to enlightenment, when in fact there are no signs that this would be the case. So I've often hoped that, oh, mixed martial Dharma arts. I wish that was that could be invented, but martial arts are expressed on the physical level to some degree you can use your mind, your awareness and energetics to bring it to that physical expression, but it is physical. That's the whole point. But Dharma, yoga, it's about energetics, so it's can't change those punches, can't
Yeah,
disperse those delusions in the same way.
I think that on a inter-traditional level, it's difficult to get that same arena as the cage, the MMA cage. But on a personal level, uh,
Yeah.
we have the opportunity of not separating from the world. Because I remember when I was living in the meditation center in Finland back in 2016, 17.
Mm.
I told you I was planning to do a more like intensive practice period, and you instantly came with the idea, or you responded that, oh, yeah, but we should find some way that you can get friction into your daily life, just to because that's the arena, that's the cage, and going into the world, dealing with something that is out of your comfort zone.
Mm.
And I think that on an individual level, you have this emphasis on like bringing your own benefits to, like the benefits that you receive to others, compassion in action, and that it plays a similar role, because you can achieve very comfortable life by separating from everyday life. But again, it doesn't bring that. It's not authentic practice because it is then separated from everyday life, which is going to challenge you in some way or another.
Mm.
There was another point as well. Maybe I'll remember it.
Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? Um, mm, Disillusionment is a major gift, but you won't experience disillusionment unless and until you ask for truth, you ask for reality, and when you make that your priority.
Because it's uncomfortable. Like it's
Yeah,
massively uncomfortable to
yeah,
be
yeah,
disillusioned. You have to give up something like that you thought was a part of yourself. But again, that's the whole process.
yeah, exactly. It is very uncomfortable, very. Literally, like bone and marrow
Yeah,
type
yeah. It's like
discomfort.
death, like a small death, like
Yeah,
or grief, or like
yeah, yeah. Oh, but it is a major gift. But it is an interesting question and discussion maybe for other time, that some people have disillusionments. Practitioners have, and some don't.
mm,
Some just don't. But there you have it. I've seen it in so many people that they are wanting something else from practice than truth and reality. But something that my teacher, I had two heart teachers, Sivakami and then Terayama Roshi. And Sivakami told me that no matter what, always ask for the truth. And when you do that, it gives you the gift of disillusionment, but it also protects you in so many different ways. Keeps you safe.
and this is common also to all arts, all like science. You can get there are so many examples of people who just stick to their theory that doesn't work, their belief system that doesn't work, and filter out things that don't fit with their paradigm. Um,
Yeah,
one
yeah.
other point that I was going to mention is that regarding the topic of principles versus uh, dogmatic rules, is that just like I've watched the evolution of MMA from the first fights. They're available on YouTube, and it's quite a different sport back then, you know. They actually came in with their respective traditions, like completely, fully. Like there's a sumo wrestler, you know, that's quite funny. First season. Anyways, it took on a new expression because of these different streams of um, like
Yeah, yeah.
different the different streams from each tradition, and also when they all meet, like there's this feedback that causes quite a rapid evolution to happen. And my point is that because we're not speaking about dogmatic rules of enlightenment, but principles, there is the possibility of completely new expressions to arise that
Oh,
are also that are fully grounded in those principles of truth, of reality,
yeah.
but on the surface might not be recognizable to the unexperienced eye or practitioner. And I think that's very important. And there is no limit. We cannot today know how Dharma will look 1,000 years from now. It will be based on the same principles, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm just saying that it could be just the same 1,000 years, but we don't know because there is an endless like potential based in these principles for new expressions.
Yeah. One thing that is very treacherous, very dangerous is becoming fixated into one understanding of the principles. This is a very, very wide problem. Maybe we will discuss it a little bit more. Should we continue discussing a little bit more technical side of full enlightenment? We've already referred to that several times, and we started this discussion by saying that we all have met with these more or less vague definitions of enlightenment. So that is over now. Now we're going to have very exact and detailed. That, sorry, might not be commonsensical at first, but there is standards here, and there is there are standards and principles, again, coming from our very subtle bodies. Mine, Simha's, and yours. No matter who you are, we all have the same subtle bodies. So maybe I'll just give you a brief introduction to the three bodies. First, physical tissue. So you have soft tissue, you have hard tissue, you have physical bones, organs, liquids, and that's the physical body. Okay? But like we already discussed, that delusion and suffering, or wisdom and insight, it's not about the physical body really. It's about subtle bodies. It's about mind. Okay, what mind? What subtle bodies? What does it actually mean? It means that there are two different subtle bodies. Two different subtle bodies. And one of those subtle bodies has the exact same form as the physical body, but it is not physical. It is very close to the physical body, but it is not physical. It's kind of like if you have a musical instrument. I have guitars, and you have the string of a guitar, and then you have the sound from the string. the physical string and the sound are two different things, but it's you can't separate the two, right? So it's kind of like physical body, and then there is the first one of the subtle bodies, the grosser of the subtle bodies, that is known commonly, widely spoken, with the term astral body. Astral body. It's called, is it linga sharira in Sanskrit? So astral body. And astral body is the same, traditional Chinese medicine that many know through acupuncture, for example. Myself, I was a practitioner of shiatsu, which is a form of Japanese massage that is based on the theory of traditional Chinese medicine, meaning acupuncture, discusses of meridians, meridian channels. I don't actually remember what's the Chinese name for meridians, and it doesn't actually matter. We are talking universal standards. But this astral body of ours that is in the shape of the physical body, but is not physical, it is made of these particular type of channels. And they are, I have my prayer beads, my mala here. These channels are roughly the size of this string. So quite large channels. But the whole, if we think of the body space, the space inside the physical body, that space is full of these channels. So if I was holding, let's say 50 of these malas and holding them in a bundle, it would be a big bundle, but you would see that, there are these strings stacked, bundled together. And that's exactly how it is inside our arms, inside our head, inside our torso, inside our legs. Very thick channels. What is interesting that I want to mention about the relation of physical body and astral body is what is done in acupuncture. Because, in acupuncture they use physical needles and they place them, they actually put the needles inside the physical body through the skin to non-physical acupuncture points. Physical needles to non-physical acupuncture points to make the energy circulation better, to heal ailments in the physical body and its physical organs. That's amazing, isn't it?
That
Fascinating.
connected.
Huh?
It's that connected.
Yeah.
The two.
Yeah. So, physical body, astral body. And then there's the third of our bodies that everybody has, second of the subtle bodies, which is commonly known as causal body. Causal body. I think it's somebody 100 years ago started translating, what's the Sanskrit term? Something sharira, I don't remember. Translated is as causal body because it's the subtlemost of all three bodies, subtlemost of our bodies. So it's kind of the cause of everything, causal. Maybe that was the reason. But so second of the subtle bodies, which is subtler, lighter than the first one. And this one is in the space inside the physical body, as well as creates the aura, creates the auric field, energy field around our bodies, on the sides, behind, front, below and above. We have nowadays kind of seeing images of human aura. It's you can find 5 million images with Google search. So I think a lot of people know about the aura, but there's more to the aura than just the egg-shaped sphere. And it is the vertical pillar that goes 5-6 meters, which is about 20 feet in feet, goes 5-6 meters, about 20 feet down from the body and up to the sky. So there is the aura and there is the so-called vertical pillar. So this is the causal body that is not made of same density, same thickness, same heaviness as the meridians are, but are made of lighter channels. In Amrita Mandala we speak of meridian channels of the astral body and nadi channels of the causal body and aura. But nadi is used in different ways. Nadi is simply a Sanskrit word that means a channel or a tube. But it is perfectly sufficient to understand that the astral body is grosser and heavier and denser, and the causal body is lighter. The channels are much thinner, like the thinness of a hair, of a single hair. And there are tens of thousands of these channels that inside the physical body radiating out to create the whole aura and to create the vertical pillar. There are maybe roughly 700-800 to 1,000 meridian channels inside the body. That's, by the way, an important point, because traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture only speaks of something like 20 or 30 meridians. But actually, the reason why we use the term meridian field is because it is a field. It is not only few channels hanging here and there, it is like a whole fabric of channels. So this is the foundation, these three bodies, everybody having the same physical organs. Well, nowadays you probably, I don't even know, but you probably can have like a kidney made of a machine or heart made of a machine, and with the help of medicine and Western medicine, you can perhaps replace some organs and still keep the body running. But my point is that every human body have the same organs, and in exactly the same way, all human beings, men or women, east, west, north, south, big, small, skinny, fat, we have the same subtle bodies. Same meridians, same astral body, same auric field, same vertical pillar. Same chakras, same nadis, same pure centers, what are known as dantians in Chinese system, also in Japan. Same exact anatomy, subtle anatomy. And that's where the universal standards are. They just lie there, waiting to be understood, maybe you could say discovered, because it really needs discovering these days, doesn't it? So the whole non-physical inner space is full of life, full of channels, and there's energy running through it all the time, day and night. It doesn't stop. So there's energy running through it all the time, and it gets distorted, skewed. That's what delusion, that causes suffering, is. That's what trauma causes. But nevertheless, these subtle bodies are there. And so there are so much happening there. It's very vast. You can imagine if there's roughly 1,000 meridian channels and tens of thousands of channels in the aura, it means that there's a lot happening there. But it is not complex at all. It is not complex. If we look at the starry sky at night, we can see that there's endless amount of stars there. So there's a lot happening there, but it's not complex. It follows a rule, right? Exactly the same thing with the subtle body. And then when we discuss different kinds of enlightenment, we have the astral body, and whether it still stores traumas and negative causes of negative emotion, or if it's pure. We have impure or pure astral body. Okay? Same thing with the causal body. If there are still self-delusions, dualistic delusions, causes of ignorance there, then it is impure causal body. But when we get to the end of the wisdom, jnana, emptiness, insight process, then it is revealed to us as completely pure. And if we want to categorize, play this with a little bit, think about this a little bit in relation to Buddhist vehicles and different types of enlightenments according to Buddhist vehicles. So somebody, just to give you a little intro, there are 3 vehicles in Buddhism. The first one is the classical Buddhism, also known as Theravada Buddhism or Hinayana Buddhism. And then there is Mahayana, the great vehicle. So Theravada, Theravada, Mahayana. Mahayana means great vehicle, and they have already quite different views, different takes on things, different take on enlightenment, definitely, very different. And then the third vehicle is the tantric vehicle, called Vajrayana or Tantrayana. And the Vajrayana or Tantrayana is simply the tantric expression of the Mahayana. Tantric expression. So the end result of Mahayana and Vajrayana are the same. They don't disagree with about the end result, about the meaning and view of full enlightenment. But Mahayana and Vajrayana have a different view than Theravada view does. And this has actually been discussed. What's the name of that text? It's a classical Buddhist sutra. I can't remember it. Maybe somebody can write it in the comments, but there is classical Buddhist literature, of course, from Theravada, and then there is Mahayana literature that discusses the differences between Mahayana and Theravada, and also Mahayanis also discuss about the limitations of Theravada. And I'm not really interested about debating this stuff, or I'm not interested in pointing fingers to others' limitations, but when we discuss the understanding of full enlightenment according to Theravada, both my personal view, based on studying internally the matter, as well as studying the proponents of Theravada, I agree with the Mahayana literature that says that the Buddhas of the Theravada vehicle, that are called Arhats, they have pure astral body plus the part of the nadi system of the causal body that is inside the space of the body, inside the skin, meaning, though in non-physical space, that area of the causal body is also pure. So astral body inside the body is pure, and causal body inside the physical body are pure. And this is Arhat enlightenment. Something, again, I'm referring to the previous episodes of our podcast about bhumis. In Amrita Mandala we discuss bhumis a lot. We use the so-called 13 bhumi model as our path map, which is also has foundation in Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, but actually much earlier already in Hindu tradition. Buddhists got the concept from Hinduism. Like Buddhism took a lot from Hinduism, but the concept of bhumi is already in Rig Veda, which has been written down about 12,000 years ago. So it's an ancient concept. But in Amrita Mandala we use the so-called 13 bhumi model as a path map, and what it means is that the causal body, the subtler of the subtle bodies, is made of specific energy centers or chakras, and these centers have specific vibratory areas, vibratory fields. So when we discuss the Buddhas of the Theravada Hinayana path, the so-called Arhats, and when they have pure astral body and pure causal body inside the physical body, that area, that terrain of the causal body is bhumis 1 through 6. So there is 6 distinct vibratory areas in the causal body inside the physical body. And I've written books about this, we've discussed this, so you're welcome to look into the previous episodes and books. But that's what Arhats attain. So their attainment in terms of wisdom or emptiness or jnana process does not cover and reach to the auric field or the vertical pillar. It only happens in the space inside the physical body. And this, historically, this was taught by the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha gave 3 different stages of teachings, the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. And in the first turning, he taught practices and gave teachings of what will result in the attainment of an Arhat with pure astral body and partially pure causal body. Any thoughts?
No, it just comes to mind that because you still say that it's just a clarification that it's the same enlightened nature that is revealed. It's only then in the one in what we call Theravada or Hinayana, it's revealed partially within our system, but it's the same enlightened nature.
Oh, yes.
So that's...
Yeah, that's a very good point. And something before discussing full enlightenment or Buddhahood, one interesting discussion is about finishing either of the two subtle bodies, because this happens. So, according to my analysis, the greatest saints and sages and masters, yogis in the Hindu tradition, they have pure astral bodies, but very rarely also pure causal bodies. Like if you look at the most famous swamis, well, actually now when I said that, I instantly thought of very famous Hindu gurus who both their subtle bodies were impure, were not completed. But I can also say that there has been many famous swamis and paramahamsas who had completely pure astral body. On the Buddhist side of things, well, sometimes at the moment there are living arhats. I've spoken about this in my social media, in Facebook, that there are living arhats. In Mahayana, it is usually the case that those who are committed practitioners are usually on some stages of bodhisattva bhumis, so they haven't finished the causal body purification, and often is the case that they advance to some degree in astral body purification, but most Mahayana folks are on that terrain, meaning that they have a number of awakening experiences, cessations of the mind, and some degree of astral body purification. And then fortunately, so we are talking about finishing either of the two. So, but then if I don't obviously know everybody in the world and all traditions, but I know quite a bit. I've energetically analyzed, I don't know, 50 million people. It's so many, thousands and thousands. Okay, but it is very, very rare to find somebody who would have pure causal body, completed causal body purification. That is very rare. In Amrita Mandala we have 21 people who have. Because, well, this is something we discussed. We have a specific practices and path for that. We have two different paths, kind of two different methods in Amrita Mandala, and one of them is focused on wisdom, emptiness, turning ignorance into wisdom side of things. And we have 21 people who finished it, who are now at the process of astral body purification. But yeah, that is the case that at least I haven't. Of course, there are living Buddhas, fully enlightened beings in the world. Ammachi, Hugging Saint Amma, is somebody who has both subtle bodies completely pure. I think Garchen Rinpoche, I'm not fully sure, I haven't analyzed him, but I think Garchen Rinpoche, who's now something like 85 years old, that he also has light body. By the way, when I say the term light body or rainbow body, I mean purity of both subtle bodies. So this is actually an important distinction, that light body, the term, or rainbow body, golden body, immortality, means that you finish purification of both subtle bodies. So if you purify the astral body but the causal body is still unfinished, it is not light body. Yeah.
So just to summarize a little bit so far, is that what you're saying is that there are different combinations of this partial and full enlightenment. So on the partial side, you can, as you first mentioned, you can reveal the enlightened nature fully in both subtle bodies, but confined to the space of the body, and that's traditionally called arhat.
Yeah.
Then you also have the possibility, like roughly speaking, then of either purifying fully one and not the other, so that the other might be fully untouched, unrevealed, or it might be somewhere along the line. But then you have astral body enlightenment, revealing the enlightened nature of astral body, and similarly of causal body. And finally, you have full enlightenment, rainbow body immortality, which is both subtle bodies fully purified, fully revealed.
Exactly, exactly. And that is full enlightenment. The technical Sanskrit term in Buddhism is Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. This term is in the, I think the most widely chanted scripture is the Heart Sutra, the short Heart Sutra. That term is in that sutra, among many other texts. But that's what Buddhahood is. And here's the deal when we discuss universal standards. So I didn't go into the specifics of the aura and the vertical pillar, which is really important when we discuss universal standards. We've discussed that a lot. But something when learning the potential and studying the potential of universal standards, again, you can only understand it through meditative yogic experience, through feeling, through sensation, not concepts. Okay? So when we discuss Jesus and Padmasambhava and Babaji and Lao Tzu in the same sentence, and verifying or falsifying their equality in terms of enlightenedness, we have to have meditative yogic skill, in other words, quiet mind and significant sensitivity and meditative experience of our own subtle body to be able to understand that, oh, they are equal in terms of enlightenedness based on these universal standards.
And this is how this model of Amrita Mandala came about in the first place, is through actual yogic studies. So it's not sitting down thinking about these things, but it's combining, it's thinking about, it's having experiences and then reflecting on these experiences to extract out some way to transmit it visually, verbally.
Yes.
And in so that other people can more easily experience it, use that model to map it for themselves as an experience.
Yes, yes. And here also we need to understand that we need to understand what kind of study we are talking about and commitment we are talking about. This is not like if I look out the window now and simply make some simple observation about the weather, if it's raining or not, it doesn't happen that fast. We are talking about lots of subtlety here. And this is something that throughout the years when I've communicated this, people don't understand and kind of say that, chakras, no, 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 no. That no, only my system and masters of my tradition have the exactly right. What you're talking with chakras is that nonsense.
We call it something else.
Aye, exactly right. Or yeah, well, but it's it's the when we talk about any art in high level, I have enough experience of both music and painting to be able to kind of have that same discussion. But when I look, there was just Paris Olympics in television, and I love watching sports from the telly, and gymnastics is one of my favorites. But I have no bloody clue about, not even kind of the basic technique stuff of gymnastics, not to even mention, when Simone Biles, when she there is the event where she is on the flat surface and runs and makes these really high jumps and triple jumps with so many different, how do you say, turns, and it happens in a 1 or 1.5 seconds. But I don't have the eye. My understanding of gymnastics, the subtleties of it, is far from sufficient to be able to have a conversation with some gymnastics pro who said that, oh, she really did that little thing in the second spin during that jump in that one spot. I have no bloody clue. I just see that it is absolutely magnificent and extraordinary, and that I don't see anybody else do that. But this is exactly the point, and this applies to all kinds of arts again. This applies even to simple handcrafts, actually. When somebody, pottery, for example, I can very easily make a pot out of clay and put it in the kiln and have a like a clay pot that I made it. But I've known masters of Japanese pottery, and my bloody pot isn't even nearly the same kind of feel and intensity and texture and feel like theirs. This is the point. So, to understand universal standards, yes, they are universal, but it's an art form.
And mastery is drilling down to
Yeah,
the universal principles,
yes,
really understanding those.
yeah. All right, what's next? So we already got to full enlightenment, which is the same as Buddhahood, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. And oh yes, something that I was meaning to say when I mentioned Buddha's first turning of the wheel of Dharma and how it leads to the Arhat attainment. But in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, Shakyamuni Buddha gave emptiness teachings, the full range of emptiness teachings, which is not limited by the terrain bhumis 1 through 6, but goes from 1 through 10. So causal body inside the physical body, including the aura and including the vertical pillar. So this is actually interesting and fascinating to contemplate that Shakyamuni Buddha, in first turning, he taught what he taught, and in second turning, he made the point very clear about the full range of full scope of the causal body. But then there was the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is about that when both astral and causal bodies are returned into their original pristine purity, what is discovered? which, light body, rainbow body, golden body, immortality, there are some authors. I immediately think of the Jonang tradition of Buddhism, and especially Taranatha and Dolpopa, who have written about this. Longchenpa of Tibet from Nyingma school is another, who have discussed about, as well as Taoist authors, Taoist immortals, about what that experience is like, what we are cultivating when cultivating the light body, or when we have those cessations, or when we reach the final cessation, when both bodies are pure. And it is not mystical, it is not complex, it is very down to earth stuff, like we can learn from Taoist texts, or Buddhists are usually, when they start grinding on technical details, they keep at it until they're done and exhausted with it. But at the same time, there are authors like Dolpopa and Taranatha and others from Jonang whose descriptions are absolutely delightful. Yeah. So I just wanted to briefly mention this third turning of the wheel of Dharma, also to remind our Buddhist friends that emptiness is not the end of the whole thing. There is third turning of the wheel. So what's next? Should we? Yes, please.
No, I was just going to say that. So we've been through this technical description of these bodies. On a more experiential side of things, I know that you often speak of different qualities that can be associated with each of these bodies to a more or less degree. So that, for example, you've already mentioned clarity a lot, and you have also mentioned this radiance. So maybe we could speak how they relate to causal body, astral body, and also in terms of how to practice each, how to work with each.
Well, sure, yes. I just immediately came to think of, the three basic characteristics are clarity of mind, aliveness of your whole being, and groundedness, down to earthness. And what I find, what is simply the case, even if I can say clarity of mind, or I can say aliveness, or I can say groundedness, and somebody who's listening, like I listened to, read books and listened to so many teachers, I went, yes, I know what that means. That's the problem. Because what is our enlightened nature with any of its basic characteristics, or some other facets that our nature has, say other qualities? My observation is that at least you need to work with a teacher who's very experienced, is established in this basic state, and who can communicate it to you not only verbally, but from her or his actual living experience. Then you can really understand your own enlightened nature. And having said that, I said that you need a teacher, but I would even say that the teacher needs to be a teacher of tantric yoga or esoteric practice, because esoteric, tantric, the basic thing in Tantra is empowerments and transmissions, where the teacher transmits her or his experience to students in the form of deities, in the form of Guru Yoga, or just direct transmission. And this happens to some degree in systems that are not esoteric, that are not tantric, the correct term, that are sutric. But so there is an element of transmission always. But to make it really clear, the transmission or empowerments are a very important way of communication of spirituality. And when we start studying, if we wish to reach full enlightenment in this body, in this life, then we don't have time to waste. Then we really need to figure out things fast, get the basics right fast, not using, not even 5 years, not to mention 30 years for understanding, getting the basic understanding of basics for so long. We have to get it from the start. And this is the reason that if we want to reach enlightenment in this life, we can't waste time. We can't do irrelevant practices. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, it was a quite general question. I think you did answer the question. I was just speaking about those three enlightened qualities and how they relate to each of the bodies. But it's a good point that it's one thing to speak about the qualities and another to actually experience them. But my main point was that there is difference between the experience of the two and also the approach to which we practice to purify each is not the same.
Yeah. So, well, in Amrita Mandala we have, I already mentioned, two different paths. Well, we have actually two different paths, but two different practices, two different sets of practice for two different subtle bodies. And the reason for that is what I already mentioned, that the other one is lighter, subtler, and the other one is grosser. So same practices don't work for both. And this is actually has been covered already in classical Hindu yogas, where there are three: Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Karma Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is supposed to cover the astral body. Jnana Yoga, already discussed, is supposed to cover the causal body. And Karma Yoga is the expression of it, the compassionate expression of selfless service to the world. On the Buddhist side of things, there is the two practice principles of shamatha and vipassana. Shamatha is supposed to touch and cover the astral body. Vipassana, the causal body. But here we face a problem with shamatha that we already referred to it a few times, that shamatha is commonly practiced as concentration practice. Keep concentrated. I said it, keep concentrated, but in a kind of tense way, but just practice concentration, focusing on something. okay, this has some effect on the astral body, but I think this is a basic fault when teaching samatha, because samatha is meant as a healing practice. It only makes sense if we want to really reap fruit from samatha practice. It makes sense only as healing practice, because that's the only way to access and finish the purification of the astral body. You know, I did so many years and thousands of hours of samatha practice, and my concentration was so good that, figuratively speaking, I could burn a hole to a wall. But when the disillusionment came, you know, I didn't get awakened through such a, massive effort, and I was asking for truth, reality. I started, like, I became so upset. What the hell I'm supposed to do with this concentration? You know, while at the same time there's so much trauma, unhealed, unaddressed trauma in my system. So it wasn't that helpful. And I know that's the case for a lot of people. Lots of people practice Buddhist shamatha. But because of my experiences and what I've learned, I don't teach shamatha. I teach shamatha, but not as concentration practice, as healing practice.
I've actually thought about this, that there is this term traditionally in the Eightfold Path of right, like right wisdom, right concentration. That whole, if we look away from the fact that it's translated into concentration, I would suggest that maybe like this might be controversial, but that right shamatha, which I know it's not the word that is used, but right shamatha is actually very like it's a different emphasis than how it's traditionally or usually how I encountered it
Yeah,
when I learned it,
yeah.
which with the emphasis on staying with an object instead of using that object as a way to uh, uh, um, allow energies to flow without interference and heal the whole, or heal the system.
Mm, mm.
But and one thing that, sorry, if you wanted to comment on that first.
No, no, go ahead.
No, because I'm not sure if we specifically, because you mentioned trauma and you have mentioned self delusion. I'm not sure if we have specifically mentioned in this episode so far the relation to each of these bodies and why there's a different, because that also explains why there is a need for different practices to uh, work with each of the subtle bodies.
Okay,
So,
go
yeah,
ahead.
so what I mean is that, I don't is that this selfing or self-delusion is stored in the causal body, whereas traumas are found are found in the astral body.
Is that a question?
No, no, it's just a clarification. I'm not sure if we mentioned it specific so far.
Ah, okay. I'm not sure if I understood what you mean.
I just think that also explains there are different
Ah,
obscurations that are primarily related to each of those bodies, and thus it kind of explains why there is a need for those different principles and different paths in addressing and purifying, restoring each of those separate bodies.
yes, 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 yes. Well, now you made it clear. Uh, mm, how about is the practice endless, continuous? process of growth and insight. That's
So
also, huh?
that's what I've heard the most. So it must be, it's always, it's an ongoing process. There is no end. Um, no, I think that that's it is a very common question whether there is an end to enlightenment or whether it's an ongoing process. And I think that there are like I think there's the black and white. I would answer it with a black and white answer that yes, there is a final end to this practice, and that it is this universal, in lack of a better term, phenomena that we call enlightenment. But to give credit to the other, there is also there is also like an I would think that it can be expressed in different ways, maybe in combination with other arts, other skills, so that it's not that life ends at enlightenment, or all growth ends at enlightenment, to put it like that. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes and no. That your last sentence was very dangerous in one sense, but now that you said it, we have to differentiate between purification or enlightenment process and personal growth. So go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, that is what I'm hinting at, is that you have parallel. This is quite common to speak about, that there are parallel, not sure which term to use, but that it's often presented as parallel intelligences, or like you have, for example, you have um, the IQ type intelligence, you have emotional intelligence, you have whatever sexual intelligence, practical, and that these are separate, and that you can be on different stages of each. So I'm just using that as an example because I think it's similar with spiritual enlightenment, that can be completed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are finished growing as a person into whatever, like different ways that you can grow as a person. I think that there is I realize the problematic area of using also emotional intelligence in there, because I think actually it is included in spiritual enlightenment, that you are when you have healed emotionally, that's the end of like growing emotionally. But it doesn't mean that you can still wow, you can still grow in other ways. I'm struggling a bit here, if you if you didn't notice too.
I'm letting you struggle and get a
I
web
was
of
just
confusion.
growing.
I think growth is not the right word, because when we discuss the two subtle bodies and their purity, which is enlightenment, which is Buddhahood, which is, we can see it in our present world. We can see it in hugging Saint Amma, for example, who I hold in very high regard. I've spent so much time in her presence and briefly with her physically that and analyzed her, so I know that she's a fully enlightened being. So we can see it in somebody like her. Maybe, listener, maybe you have been fortunate to have spent some time with some Tibetan Buddhist greats like Dilgo Khyentse or Chatral Rinpoche or some others who were also Mahasiddhas. I interviewed Lama Lisa and Lama John Hogue on this podcast in previous episodes. check them out because they talk about their close experience with these mentioned gurus. But I don't think growing ends, processing ends when you purify the subtle bodies. When it comes to this emotional learning and growth from it, I said that growth is probably the wrong word. I think that response is something that, wholesome response, not responding from, I'm instantly hurt and insulted and offended in gross or subtle way, but not having that anymore and not having self-based, self-centered existence anymore. So you simply respond in wholesome manner, in a kind, clear, compassionate manner in situations where you have never been before, whatever those situations are. I think that's how it works. And this
With
is
enlightenment, yes. When you have,
oh yes, yes.
when you have finished, yeah.
And this is what I have. This is not only, this is not hypothetical when I say that. I have experience of that because I have experienced relatively long cessations of both subtle bodies. So I've experienced what it feels like to be a fully enlightened Buddha, Mahasiddha, for extended periods. And when I've been in situations, when I've gone to situations where I haven't been before. So there is no learning like there is for samsaric being, but there is simply response. Response. And this doesn't mean that, oh, you don't have to think about it. Yes, you don't necessarily have to think about it as much as you had to as a samsaric being, but the mental processing is much simpler and much more sufficient in that manner.
But then also that will, because going back to this personal growth is dangerous territory. You're not done experiencing, having different kinds of experiences, which will then influence your way of thinking on different levels.
Yes,
So just to separate, that's where I kind of got lost. I
yes,
wasn't trying to imply that enlightenment is growth, that there is growth of that after, but that there are separate areas, experiences, like your physical body doesn't stop if we tie like a uh, I'm going into another area that you hate.
go ahead.
The different brain functions and processing, that still, is impacted by the feedback, by the stimuli that you get through your experiences. So you can still grow as a person. You can still learn new languages, learn new skills,
Yeah,
completely separately from the fact that you have attained final enlightenment.
sure. Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah.
I wrote myself in back.
As long as you don't mention, this is a bit of an inside joke between me and Simha, but as long as you don't mention neuroscience, I'm okay. Okay. Um, we already discussed cessations. Cessation is, in traditional terminology, it's nirodha. Nirodha. That is closely linked to nirvana, one of the most famous rock and roll bands of last century. But nirvana and nirodha are central actually in Buddha Dharma, but also in Hinduism. Oh, it's such a mess when it comes to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is one of the most widely read classic in the world of Hindu yoga these days. The second line goes yogaha chitta vritti nirodha. Nirodha, cessation. And well, I'll just say that there's lots of confusion about what this nirodha, what this cessation is. But we already discussed it a little bit. And one thing that would be good to understand is how the process is like. How do you go, what do you experience when you go through the process? Can you want to take a...
So I already mentioned, or we have already mentioned several times, cessations. So to me, they kind of represent a start of a cycle, whether we're speaking, because you kind of have to separate between the causal body and the astral body to get, like, you can do that and explain, each cycle, but I'm not sure if that's a better way just to speak of cycles in general. And cessation represent a kind of, well, both an end and a start of a cycle. So,
But one thing that is, before discussing cycles, we need to understand that the process is cyclical.
yes, it's a cyclical process. And one cycle ends with cessation and another begins with cessation, because that's a kind of a, in lack of a better term, reset. It's an opening. It's a starting back, getting back in touch with truth. And then on the opposite side of that cycle, so there are individual differences in how you experience a cycle, and it might differentiate from one cycle to another. But anyways, on the opposite end of the scale or side of the cycle are what we usually called dark nights. And a dark night represents kind of like a culmination of whatever delusion or trauma it is that you are working through, either consciously or subconsciously at that given moment. So that's the peak. That's the most uncomfortable side. But then as you work through it, like allow the energies to run through without hiding from it, bringing awareness to it, bringing a love to it, eventually these dark clouds or the darkness of the dark night will start to evaporate, and the cycle goes back to cessation, which you could say marks the shedding of one layer, whether it's a big layer or a small layer. It marks the release of that layer. And that's not to say that, you won't experience similar things or the same, pattern at a given moment, at a later stage, but it's a shedding of part of that layer. And my experience is also that these stages, so it is not the same cycle over and over. In one sense, it is the same cycle over and over, but as an experience, there is also like a moving from very gross and obvious obscurations of the enlightened stage. So you can't kind of deny that it is like either a delusion or a trauma pattern. But then it moves into more and more subtle expressions of those delusional states, to the point where it gets more and more difficult to recognize what is going on as well. But that being said, it comes at a later stage, so that you also have more practice under your belt, which hopefully is and combined with having precise practices will then allow you to see through those layers as well and not get stuck in a cycle, which is also possible.
When you said that about the cycle and cycling, I came to think of samsaric cycling. So
I was just thinking, yeah.
cycling for non-practitioners. So I think that the process really is that the cycling is stopped, it ceases, which makes it dharma or yoga or spirituality. But if it just keeps going on, more or less the same, this is samsaric. So this is actually very interesting to think that if we think that there is cessations, they are passing experiences leading to dark nights, and dark nights lead to cessations. Dark nights, by the way, are it's a Christian term that is widely used in Buddhism by Buddhist practitioners today. There is Buddhist terms for it also, but dark night has kind of become a commonly used. But so yeah, it's very important that it's the cessation, the insight, the awakenings that put a stop momentarily to that compulsory rolling, compulsory samsaric movement of the mind. But this doesn't happen to people spontaneously, unless you're getting married and it's the night before, or unless you just had a child and you might have an experience, your everyday mind is shattered and you have
Somebody dies.
somebody
That's
die, something happens. Yeah, but otherwise it just keeps going and going, and this going and going takes you from one life to the next and creates karma, creates habits and patterns, samskaras, vasanas, and it keeps going until you get full of it. You start questioning, is this all there is? Right? So I just wanted to say that. Was there something else you were meaning to?
I was just on what you just said is that yeah, so samsara can be viewed as the same layer, like it's the same density over and over. But I just came to think that the cycling of dharmic practice, it is still going through samsara. It's just that it's more and more subtle layers because it doesn't stop until final cessation. But those cessations are really like those um, um, well, intermediates. I don't know the right, like those that are not the final cessations are still like the key issue in um, refining your perception of samsara and your ability to work with it, work through it. But you're still working through the same cycling, which is the definition of samsara.
Yeah, and also discovering our true nature, our true, I don't know if identity is the word, but our true being, and that it's completely personal. It is not impersonal, but it is really our own nature. Uh, Something about dark nights. I think dark nights are way too little discussed still. And I just wanted to say that you mentioned this already briefly, but dark nights can be extremely uncomfortable. It can be just awful, awful, awful. And whether it's, if we imagine that we would have some extremely intense illness, like food poisoning, for example, or like a really bad one. for half a day, it's intensely uncomfortable. But dark nights can be like that for much longer. It can be very, very uncomfortable. And I just wanted to say that because it's part of the path. You cannot avoid dark nights. Like Simha so well put, that you're cycling through your samsara, but with the help of increased awareness. You start to know through these awakening experiences and through healing your traumas gradually, you start to know your real true self, your true identity. So you have that, as well as if you're a tantric practitioner, you have the gurus and you have the sources of refuge. You have, if you will, if you pray to God, you have your God likeness with you more and more. That will help you. But nevertheless, because the practice keeps drilling into our mind and going deeper and deeper, and while it's not same, but it is similar, but because it is a bit different than the last time around, is why these negativities, the inner demons we have inside us, not external demons like some monsters under the bed, but our own anger and hatred and greed and what have you, it always surprises you. It always sneaks up on you and grabs a hold of you. This
And
always.
every single time.
Yeah. But at the same time, we are not spineless, we are not toothless, we have willpower, we have, we grow into all those qualities that our basic nature has. And what is also important to understand through healing of trauma is that we gain natural confidence, we gain natural willpower. So that's what I mean, that we aren't helpless, we aren't toothless and spineless, that and through engaging with the practice over a long time, we can also learn to enjoy dark nights. Sometimes they are a son of a bitch, very, very difficult and very, very challenging. But sometimes not. Sometimes dark night comes, when we have some mileage, and we can just, okay, yeah.
In my experience, though, because there is that gradual, because you get more and more familiar with your own nature through each cessation. But in my experience, to get to the point or to enjoy dark nights, you need to keep up sufficient practice, sufficient level of practice. And I'm
Yeah,
talking about several hours a day, not because it's not comfortable
yeah,
otherwise, because then you can't see it. You on one level become identified with it, and then you get stuck with it for longer. It's personal in not the good way, but in the bad way, like as identification. Also, one point, if you practice then sufficiently, it's much quicker. Like the cycles are much quicker, so you're not just endlessly, it feels like the experience is not that you're just endlessly for weeks dealing with,
yeah,
this one issue that you're not kind of sure because you haven't established yourself enough in the practice through spending enough time in practice. So that's just a point, that it's not, there is the aspect of what you gain through long practice, but there is also continuous need for sufficient time, quantity.
And that leads me to, so we are talking about full enlightenment here. And well, I mentioned Ammachi, I mentioned Garchen Rinpoche. Garchen Rinpoche himself said in a public teaching I think in 2017, he said that now that I'm finished, and now that I have finished my practice, the exact quote is actually in Buddhas Among Us, in the book with the section of different quotes. So he was something like 78 or 77, something like this years old when he, if I'm right, like again, I haven't done analysis for him, but I think that he has finished purification of both subtle bodies. So he was already well past his 70th birthday, so in his advanced age, let's put it like that. I mentioned Amma, and I think that she re-established herself in this life when she was 14 or 15. She herself said that Amma became Amma at, was it 15 years old or something. But for, so Amma, or often the Indian saints and sages and masters are kind of exception because they are born in India, and India is a bit different circumstances than living in Finland or Norway or Germany or UK or US. But one thing that you already referred to, what is really important to understand, that we are talking about full enlightenment here. And for example, in Garchen Rinpoche's case, in the case of majority of fully enlightened beings, they have spent many decades in practice, in full-time practice, full-time commitment until they get there. Okay, there are differences between methods, and this understandably when I mentioned that in Amrita Mandala we have over 20 people who have finished purification of causal body, that usually takes several decades. But there are differences in methods. I'll just leave it there. I don't have a need to convince anybody. Everybody can study, look into the practices and try them themselves. But nevertheless, whether it is 50 years of tradition X or 5 or 10 years of tradition of Amrita Mandala, it is not 20 minutes a day sitting thing. It is a full internal commitment with your whole body, with your whole heart and soul. So this is important to understand, that we are not talking about some how to make yourself 10% happier type of thing. We are talking about the same enlightenment that we've already discussed, Guru Padmasambhava and Babaji and all these great. This is the same enlightenment. And regardless of the tradition that you follow and system that you practice, it is full engagement. It's not like, okay, now I'll take well, sometimes you can take few days break from practice, but it's not like, okay, now I want practice for 6 months. It's not like that. And by saying this, I don't mean to criticize anybody or make anybody feel bad who doesn't have that internal need. But the whole point is that you need that need to have that motivating force. No matter what, even if you have the best, the quickest method and practices that you do, it's that internal need that is required. And this need will translate into engagement and commitment. So I just wanted to say that it's not just 20 minutes a day sitting practice or 1 hour a day sitting practice. No, it's complete engagement.
Uh,
Body, heart,
and
and soul.
yeah, just that something comes to mind that was like that came up for me in meditation once, is that there isn't a moral judgment against, like it's not moral qualities, like you said, it's not a judgment of people who do not have that need. But
Mm.
what was kind of became apparent to me, or became clear to me, is that it's not like a moral capacity that makes you finish the path, but it is just that like all-consuming desire for truth, or like
Yeah,
just this deciding force or deciding factor of truth above everything else in life.
yeah, exactly. Couple of things that I would like to add to this discussion. One thing are the nature of dark nights in modern Western culture. And the second thing that I would like to discuss, kind of continue from what we just discussed, with the relevance of enlightenment in the modern world, that I actually said in the beginning. But one thing about dark nights with modern people, I think that this is, you know, yoga and Dharma teachings have been around for Buddhism has been around for 2,500 years, and they have traditional teachings of dark nights, right? But I think that, and they also, I'm sure, when we look at the 10 fetters, for example, from the Theravada vehicle, or if we look at the principles in Mahayana and so on, Vajrayana, we can see that they had some understanding of what we now speak in the West in psychological terms as trauma. Yes, they understood that traumatization happens. Having said that, I think that the modern trauma is not what people in ancient cultures had. And when I say ancient cultures, I mean, Tibetan was ancient culture. It still is actually within the borders of Tibet, but people live there like they lived 800 years ago. They live exactly the same way. They might have smartphones, but they are going about their daily lives like that. But in the West, city people, places where you and I grow up, where listeners grew up, it's a different kind of atmosphere, different feel, different culture, different kind of trauma. So I think that what we know from Western psychology as complex trauma or developmental trauma, they didn't have that in ancient times. Or if they did, it was very rare. It was rare. But nowadays, I think a lot of people have complex trauma. So if you, I don't mean to give a lecture of what complex trauma, developmental trauma is, but so you can look it up. But give the listener some sense. What I mean is that we have very shocking experiences, psychologically shocking experiences, very early in life, and so it plants a seed of fear in us. And fear has been discussed in yoga and dharma for ages, but we're talking about something much more fundamental: fear. And then, the experiences we have in broken families, in broken cultures, where there is no longer a village of adults looking after kids or straightening them out, educating them. it's our cultures, modern cultures are broken in so many ways. And then to speed things up, there is, well, the usual factors of isolation. But nowadays also the last 15 years we have smartphones. So it just keeps adding up to how our that basic trauma planted in childhood, it grows through childhood and youth and to adults. And by the time you're 30, 40 years old, definitely by the time you're 40, it's already hardened the tissues of the astral body into what is the energetic equivalent of a stone. So it completely kills, takes the life out of these meridian channels, these astral tissues. And this is something that I don't think was ever seen in, was ever a problem in ancient Dharma, let's put it that way. And this is, I've had to think about this, how to heal that kind of trauma. Because modern psychology, Western psychology, I haven't seen any psychologist or psychotherapist who would discuss full healing of trauma. They only discuss, at least what I've heard so far, they only discuss healing it to a degree and then learning to cope with it so that you can live with it. But here we are discussing full enlightenment, which means that you cannot have any, not even 1% of trauma in your astral body. But if you have these hardened bits in the system, I've had to really think about and contemplate and do experiments in my yogic laboratory how to heal complex trauma, because I have one. So if we look at this from a bit different perspective, founders of ancient forms of Dharma probably never needed to think about this or conduct experiments or to come up with practices that would heal complex trauma. But this is something that Western Dharma, in our Sangha, in other Sanghas, needs to be addressed. Yeah, I mean, if you take seriously full enlightenment in this life, then you need to address it. Partial healing or just coping with trauma, it's not good enough. And another thing I wanted to speak about is relevance of enlightenment in the world today, that I mentioned in the beginning. Relevance. It is a pretty intense situation what we have in the world. So religion, Christian religion has been abandoned by a lot of people, and well, it's a religion, it's a belief-based stuff, but still I think that the benefit from it historically, and I can remember people when I was a kid who prayed, practiced a little bit of prayers. They had like a anchor in their life. But nowadays, when people have abandoned their faiths, their religions, and haven't filled that vacuum that it leaves, but with entertainment and by following the law and maybe some ethics, secular ethics, it's a new situation also that Dharma is facing, isn't it? Well, there are challenges, But I think there are also kind of like a different kind of future, that different kind of possibilities and potential benefits coming from this situation. But well, I've founded Amrita Mandala Method, and I'm the head teacher of our Sangha, and I feel very strongly about enlightenment and its relevance in the world today. And I think it is possible, perhaps for the first time in the history, to really create a culture of enlightened beings. Not only one or two or three individuals, one in Taoism, one in Hinduism, one in Buddhism, or two or three, not just few of them scattered here and there, but to have 100 enlightened beings within our lifetime. Maybe 200 within the next generation. Isn't that fascinating?
And I think, yeah, I think for those reasons that you mentioned, they're all kind of tied together. This new type of chronic re-traumatization that is happening. That's one case, that's one aspect of our modern society, which I think is new or distinct. And second is that isolating factor, which plays into that first. Of course, they're tied together, but it seems that our modern, at least city culture, is based on trauma, which I don't think. It's like everything. It's as if, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's as if it was made to traumatize people. So that's just a result of being born out of trauma. Not like I don't think that's the intention, but you could say that. And then on top of that, this chronic stress by always being plugged in. Like there's never enough time for your own. You can never heal something when you're constantly bombarded with either. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative in one sense. There is no space for the inner dimension of your own experience. It's just constantly, hailstorm of stuff. And on top of that, and this has happened before in various cultures, usually in relation to collapse of a civilization, like an imperial collapse or whatever, empire collapsing, and that is that the narratives that we have lived with that have given support and given meaning to our lives, it's just crumbling, leaving today's narrative, which it seems like it's changing a bit, but is a nihilistic narrative. There's no meaning. It's just atoms colliding, no order in the universe, no life in the universe, no subjective experience has no value whatsoever because it can't be described in objective terms, and so on. And these factors together creates the crisis, which is also then, fortunately, when big changes can happen. And fingers crossed, it will be a opportunity for establishing these universal examples of what enlightened culture is or can be.
Yeah, that definitely, Simha, it sounds conspiracy theorist. but on a serious note, yeah, I don't know if, well, I don't know how many Dharma teachers really think about these things and kind of take them to heart, really thinking about others. But I think our nature, when we really get in touch with it, makes us think these things and act accordingly, making us do whatever we can. But I think that this yogic dimension of Dharma and spirituality that has the power to take us to full enlightenment, and if it can be done efficiently, so that this is kind of my impression, that within my lifetime, until when I keel over, that there will be maybe 100 individuals from our particular Dharma work that have attained Lightbody. And again, I'm not talking about some lofty beings who levitate and do stuff like this, or by locations. I'm talking about people like you and I, who simply have returned their psychology and their mind to their natural, radiant condition. So I think that there might be around 100 people when I'm done, which probably will be a few decades from now. But I often, we are still in the process of Amrita Mandala work too. I haven't finished my astral body purification. Causal, yes, but astral is still in the works. So a little bit have to do, but what we saw in Amrita Mandala, we started from a zero bhumi, without awakening. I started teaching full-time in October 2008. So next month it will be 16 years. And we didn't know, I didn't understand. I had little fragments of know-how that I started applying, and then I simply began to find answers with the help of my gurus, figuring out how it all works, because up until that point I have had enough of those vague definitions and practices that are more or less irrelevant, which means that I will be wasting, whatever I'm practicing, I'll be wasting time anyway. So I simply wanted it all to be efficient, so that I wouldn't be wasting time. But yeah, at the moment we have 21 or 22 people who have purified causal body, and within 1 or 2 years we will have 1 or 2 who have purified both. So walking among us. And there will be, again, 1 or 2 years later, there will be 1 or 2 more. So I don't want to say that it's fantastic or it's magnificent or anything. I'm just saying that really discussing the features of pragmatic Dharma. To me, there is no other Dharma than pragmatic Dharma. If it's not pragmatic, then it's not really Dharma. If you look at what Shakyamuni Buddha said, he made the points of pragmatic Dharma really clear. And there are bits in, I mentioned Buddha's Among Us book, that has quotes from Vairodrabhag, which is an ancient Dzogchen text, where a number of ancient Dzogchen masters openly claim what they have attained, which I think is a clear pragmatic feature. You openly discuss, it's not a claim, you just discuss that, you share out of your kindness and compassion to others, because you see the suffering around you, the samsara around you. So you say, you know, I have attained this, I have done this, I have the practices, so give it a go, maybe it helps you, like it helped me. I think that's what they were doing. with those statements. And there's so many other masters who have said exactly the same. But the modern Dharma culture is very skewed and distorted. So, well, there's sort of wrong views about many things everywhere. But maybe it's a bit far-fetched to start discussing enlightened culture, because culture means that it covers large numbers of people. But yeah, maybe it would be possible within our lifetimes to create a beginning of something that might become a culture. Yeah, by
It will have,
having many enlightened individuals who are actually enlightened, who teach universal standards, and who teach practices how others can do it.
we'll have to record that episode at a later stage. But I think that tying it back to this question is that's like taking the question of what is enlightenment seriously, I gather, is what have allowed you to progress through all your experiences and stages towards where you're at now. It's the case for me to take that question seriously and not to make any hasty conclusions about it based on, well, whatever else than direct experience it is that one has.
Yes, and also the commonsensical down-to-earth discussion that we're having now, which is why we started this podcast, is essential. Like it is, we've referred to other forms of arts and crafts the past couple of hours. It needs to be exactly the same, because we cannot communicate and convey the meaning of any art or this art without having conversations like this. And if we want to really help the world, or to start thinking of creating an enlightened culture, like all cultures, open dialogue, open discussion is essential. And that's great. This is what we do. It's very enjoyable. Feels good. I think that's good to end this episode. Thank you everybody for listening, viewing, and see you in the next one.